And in his bio, he states, "Everyone knows we are living in revolutionary times." Well, this man is indeed a revolutionary man. Richard Dolan.
It's a pleasure to be here. Hello, everyone. And I just want to thank Jordan Pease, Lori Wagner, their amazing team of volunteers who've made all of this possible. Victor, thanks for the introduction. Very minor correction, the Richard Dolan Show. I've been doing that now for 6 years, 5 or 6 years. But it's not surprising that I've really been re-energizing that show just lately, and we've given it a much better YouTube presence, so maybe it feels like a new show. In any case, I'm very glad to be here. I've got 44 minutes and 25 seconds to go here. I'm looking right at the clock, so I'm not going to be late. So for those of you who know nothing about me, I'll just very quickly, I've been researching UFOs a long time. My professional training is in the field of history. I fell into UFOs through the study of Cold War American politics, the birth of the CIA and Harry Truman and the Russians, and then found a UFO book in a bookstore that talked about the worldwide UFO cover-up, and I was in. Left academia, all my old colleagues thought I'd lost my mind, and I went on to the greatest trip I could have ever imagined, and it's still going. So, and the topic of the UFO reality, the politics, has been really always at the forefront of my thinking, and that naturally takes me into the cover-up, and will the cover-up ever end, hence disclosure. It wasn't a topic that I originally really wanted to go into, disclosure. I always thought it was a premature subject. Why talk about disclosure when we still have to deal with the cover-up and this reality? Why think about the future? But life is funny, and it just dragged me in, and now I talk about the future as much as I do about the past. That's life. But I want to go through the history of this briefly, take you to the present, and then we're going to look ahead at the future, at least as I see it. There's a massive discrepancy when you think about UFOs, and it's visible even in a conference like this, which is that if you really scratch the surface of this phenomenon, you talk to friends, you talk to individuals, you will meet undoubtedly many individuals who have had a sighting that they cannot explain, or even more, an experience that they cannot explain. It is so widespread, it's almost a cliche, like every family has got some kind of story. Even if you don't know about it, it's there. On top of that, or below that, is, and I'm going to get more into this in a moment, a deep, deep, widespread phenomenon involving government agencies, military, intelligence communities. Is global. So, in other words, we're dealing with a phenomenon that is truly universal, and it gets no love from the establishment media. It gets no love from the academic community. It gets no love from the world of science, at least officially. The world of politics, no one discusses this. That's the discrepancy. It's an odd thing. Like, it's very easy for us to forget just how strange that is, but it is very strange, right? This widespread thing, and it's absent, virtually, and it's absent from all serious political discourse, from all public discourse. And we really need to ask ourselves, why is this so? Well, I think we kind of have some of the answers already brewing in our mind, but let me keep going. Take a trip back. Let's rewind the clock a little bit, to the 1940s. There's Harry Truman, U.S. president during the late 1940s, and was the guy who, at least as far as we can tell, was really fundamentally confronted with this reality. If not earlier, then certainly not later than 1947, the Kenneth Arnold sighting in Tacoma, Washington, not far from here, the Roswell event, all in the summer of 1947. And just imagine being President Truman, and you have your top generals, your top intelligence officials, top scientists who say to you, "Sir, this phenomenon is actually real. These beings, we don't know who they are, what they are, but this is real, and we don't really have a handle on it right now." Like, just say that that's true, because that actually was what happened. What would you do if you were that man? It's very easy for us, we're in this conference talking about disclosure, to say, oh, well, you would just tell the world. And maybe there was an instinct that Truman had to do that. But then, of course, your advisors would tell you something else. Your advisors would say, just hold on there. You don't really know what we're dealing with. We don't know if they're friend or foe. You don't really know what to do with the technology. Do you share, let's say you recovered technology at Roswell, or bodies. Do you share this with the world? There are the Russians, after all. We must not share things with them. You didn't want to share atomic technology with the world. Why share something as exotic as alien tech? So no, they would just keep that on the down low for as long as possible, figure out a plan, and then, of course, the secrecy takes control. There's always the worry about public panic, which maybe you wouldn't panic if you learned that UFOs were real, but you've got relatives, and you know not all of them would handle the secrecy as well as you, or your neighbors, for example. Not everyone's the same. What we know is that this phenomenon has been confronted by global militaries, and I've been focusing on the US component of it primarily, but Canadian military has had quite a number of encounters with these objects, many. Militaries around the world, the Russians, the Chinese, the Europeans, the Australians, Africans. We know much less about African UFO history, but we know enough. We know that various African militaries have encountered these. Middle East, everywhere you want to look on the world, it's happened. That's a photograph, by the way, of a object from the early 1950s, the Korean War. I think it's a legitimate photograph. That's not the best quality. I took that with my digital camera from a book, but it's a picture from the Korean War. And so what has involved in my view of this is that this phenomenon has been engaged by militaries around the world and has involved, I guess, what I would call tacit international agreements that basically the Americans and the Russians and everyone kind of knows that there's this thing going on. You know, back in the 1950s and 60s, American researchers wanted to have UFOs openly discussed in American Congress, and one of the pretexts that they gave was because they said, we don't want a war to start over someone misidentifying a UFO and thinking it's a nuclear missile. It's kind of a good argument for the time. It really was never a valid argument, in my opinion, because in my view, the US and the Russians and everyone else, they knew that there were UFOs. And the American citizens' argument was, well, they're not admitting that this is real, so they may just not recognize it. In reality, there's been, I think, a great deal of international, at least wink, wink, quiet connection over this. I'm racing through this because I really want to get to the kind of the implications of a disclosure and the end of secrecy. What are the implications of having others here? Well, these are some of them. This is only the beginning. So they clearly have astonishing technology. And just to give you an idea, so when you look through some of the declassified reports that we have access to, we all have access to these, you can read them online. I've read them. Many of you in this audience have read them. You have encounters of objects that continually, consistently, easily outperform the best fighter interceptors that the militaries of the world have. Most recently, 6-8 months ago now, the New York Times, of course, came out with the by now famous article dealing with the so-called Tic Tac UFO encounter from 2004 off the coast of Southern California. It's become well known. It should be well known. It's an excellent case. And that involved an object that, just like all of the others that we have in the Freedom of Information Act files, an object that utterly, with ease, outperformed, in this case, the U.S. Navy's F-18A Super Hornet. That's a heck of a thing to do. And it even goes beyond that. Like, this is an object that was just hovering at the surface of the water, waiting for the Navy pilots to arrive there. It knew it was able to break through the most highly encrypted communications that the U.S. Navy has. That's interesting by itself. Waiting there for them, and then just zooming up and gone, out of visibility within 2 seconds. Estimate of speed by myself is 9,000 or more miles per hour. It's an incredible feat. So that's just one astonishing technology, one element of it. We have to ask ourselves, energy breakthroughs. Do these things signify energy breakthroughs? In other words, are they running on something a little bit better than high-octane petroleum? I'm guessing the answer is yes. What is that answer? Well, we don't really know. There's lots of possibilities, perhaps. It's not really my expertise, but there's even beyond nuclear fusion, which is itself a pretty cool thing to have. We don't really have that working as an energy. There's cold fusion, there's zero-point energy, there's who knows. But whatever they're using would portend a revolution in our own society. I mean, think about it. If this ever comes out, some major political leader says, yes, it's real, they're here. One of the early questions we'll be asking is, well, great, what are they using to go from here to there? And whatever that is, can we incorporate that into our own society? And how will that transform human civilization? The answer is fundamentally. That's just one example. So that's energy. That's propulsion breakthroughs. Imagine what it would be like. I mean, this almost sounds like a scene from the Jetsons, but if you had your own little flying saucer, like what could you do with that? You could go anywhere in the world, couldn't you? Take off from your driveway up and you're in China, like within, I don't know, a couple of minutes. So if that really were the case, I mean, that's maybe fantasy land, but let's just say a real propulsion breakthrough could feasibly allow massive transportation, movement of people that would be interesting for all of us, could also be very disruptive for societies, as you could easily imagine. But, and a real problem of control for political and other elites, people who want to be running our society, and maybe a matter of control for ordinary citizens too. Maybe you don't want everyone in the world coming into your neighborhood just to hang out and visit. Who knows, right? But so all of these are revolutionary implications. And then beyond that, what is signified by this phenomenon is just a fundamental, exotic kind of science in general, in ways that I don't think we in our lifetimes will probably ever fully appreciate, but breakthroughs in space-time manipulation, for one. I've been convinced for a long time that whatever these beings are, these objects are, they have abilities to manipulate what we call the space-time fabric in ways that we have not mastered. Any physicist worth the name will tell you that our common sense understanding of space and time are not actually the way it is. Like Steve earlier in his lecture talked about time as an arrow, which, yeah, that's right. For us, time moves forward, but a physicist of the Big Bang will tell you that the Big Bang wasn't just a big explosion in space. It was the creation of space and the creation of time. There was no time prior to that moment. How is that possible? Well, we don't really know, but that's what they'll tell you. So space and time are not intuitive, at least to our common sense. And I think that these beings, they've figured out a way to manipulate space-time. And that's something that would really, if we truly had an ability to manipulate that sort of science, I cannot even imagine how that would transform our civilization, for better or for worse. And then thinking just about the technology, I'm not even getting into existential issues of what these beings mean to us, but in terms of the technology, it's worth asking, what would the implications to our society, our civilization be when we think of all of the tech, all of the science that they bring in, and how would it be able to recreate or reorder our own civilization? But let me talk about the existential implications. All right, who actually are these guys? What are these guys? Do they look kind of like this person here? Do they look like that gray alien? I think so, based on quite a number of eyewitness reports. I mean, it's odd to say because they've become part of our pop culture, but there is no shortage of traumatized individuals who are not seeking publicity, who have had encounters with beings who look sort of like that. So what does it mean? Well, by every account, they're highly telepathic. They don't have an emotional disposition like we do. Doesn't mean that they're bad, but it just means that they are different in how they interact with us and with each other. And we might ask ourselves, what is our relation to them? Have they been here for a long, long time? Have they been here since before 1947? Well, I think someone has been here besides us before 1947. I think the evidence for what we might call ancient aliens, it's not open and shut, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good. I've mentioned a number of times, I did a brief study in the Canadian National Archives. I'm a U.S. citizen, but I don't live far from Canada. I went up to Ottawa over a decade ago, looked through the history of Canadian UFO reports, and a lot of them go back way back into the 1940s and 30s and 20s. You know, people writing to the RCMP for the historical record and talking about, you know, their sighting when they were in a young man in 1936, or what Grandpa told me from the 19-teens, and there's a lot of those in the archives. And that's just some Canadian reports. There's reports that go back hundreds and thousands of years. I think they've been here a long time. If that's so, what's our relationship to them? Did they tweak us, or they have been monitoring us? Have they inserted themselves in one way or another into our society, our structure of power? I mean, there's all these kinds of theories. I don't have the answer, but it's worth asking. And it's not just grays. There's other typologies that have been described. It's just worth asking, with an open acknowledgement of them, or a bunch of them, would it cause us to redefine ourselves in some fundamental way? I think probably yes. Now, I want to point out that I've often focused on the secrecy of UFOs, but this is not simply a secret classified phenomenon. It affects everyone. Sightings around the world have gone into millions. They're not all of alien craft. I mean, okay, but there are good sightings that have been going on for years and years and years and years, and this is where we get into the kind of a social pathology that the UFO cover-up and secrecy has caused. You know, I kind of started with this in my talk here, this discrepancy between official truth, which says, nope, nothing here, and then the actual truth. It's like you're being gaslighted by your government. The people of the world are being gaslit by their governments. And what that means is, you know something's happening, your government's, your society, your power structure is telling you something different, and you begin to doubt yourself. You begin to lose the ability to observe and analyze information objectively because you allow yourself to be lied to. And you live, you kind of take on this quality of denial, and then you learn not to look at that information. And so you actually damage yourself, you damage your cognitive capabilities. And what's happened as a result of this, if you think about it from the point of view of those people who have the true knowledge and are part of this power structure, they have their own reasons. You know, they're not all psychopaths. I think a lot of them are, but maybe not all. It's not hard to understand that there might be motives that would be employed to say, look, we can't really tell the public this because this is just too big, it's too transformative. We don't really know where we're going to come out from all of this, so what happens is a culture of lies is created. Now, the UFO subject isn't the only creator of a culture of lies, but it's one, and it's an important one. I've got a lot of colleagues who are not UFO researchers, but they'll research what we might call alternative politics and the like. And some of them are quietly into UFOs, and some aren't. Some just run away. It's like they will disbelieve their governments on everything except when it comes to UFOs, then they believe. Like, oh yes, the government says there's no such thing. Like, what happened to you? Just use your brains. So they're lying about that as well, and there's a reason. And so, but one of the things that I point out to these individuals when I have the opportunity is when we talk about things like the black budget. So that's the secret spending that's real, and it's beyond public purview. You're not allowed to look at it, especially in the United States. This is a serious issue. The U.S. black budget is larger than the military budgets of almost any other country. In other words, just the black part, the part that is not viewable, is larger than the military budget. It equals the military budget of Russia. Just the secret, just the black part. Of course, the official U.S. military budget is more than 10 times that of Russia. When people talk about how the Russians rigged the U.S. election, I'm like, are you kidding me? That's our job. We rig elections. The Russians don't rig the election. That's the Americans' job. And just one little aside, Go back to a 1996 issue of Time magazine, summer of '96, where it's out in the open. The U.S. is talking about how they really rigged the Russian election of 1996. Picture of Boris Yeltsin on the cover. So anyway, that's old history. The culture of lies, though, is... So the black budget, what I just wanted to say is that the secrecy on UFOs was critical in creating a black budget civilization. Again, not the only reason. There was the Manhattan Project. There's all these other things going on. But the need to maintain secrecy on UFOs was really significant. It goes right back to the origin of the Cold War and the post-World War II era. And if you've got this exotic tech, if you've got this major secret, you're trying to reproduce this technology, you need a lot of money. Where do you get the money? Well, you get it. You can't tell Congress, so you have to, by almost definition, engage in illegality and an end run around your formal constitutional process, and that's a black budget. And so the UFO phenomenon is a key creator of the black budget culture that has really undermined so much of the classical American political system. And back to the creation of a culture of lies. The UFO subject, at least now, maybe we're moving into something a little different. I'll get into that in just a few minutes. But up until now, for sure, it has been verboten to talk about this in a substantive way that actually promotes forward motion on the conversation. So what has happened over all of this period of really more than now one human lifetime is a runaway secrecy situation where we get a creation of what I have often called a breakaway civilization. And it's a really simple idea. I think of the black budget community on steroids. That's the breakaway civilization. So black budget community with alien tech tossed in there and the classification of breakthrough scientific developments. We all hear, I'm sure, that a lot of the black budget world is decades ahead of the official civilization. I was just chatting with a friend of mine who had a conversation with a high-level NASA official who just said to him casually, yes, there is a secret space program. That didn't mean that they're going to Mars through portals, but this individual did say that NASA gets, the 30-year-old disposals from the national security state. They're 3 decades or more ahead, and you hear this all the time. So I think what I hypothesize is that that society, having access to revolutionary technology to study, revolutionary sciences and concepts, undoubtedly would make certain breakthroughs, and some of those breakthroughs could be segued for money-making opportunities, undoubtedly. Everyone wants to make money. But some of them might just be a little too important even for money-making opportunities, such as propulsion, such as energy breakthroughs. Why step on ExxonMobil's toes if you don't have to? Things are going just fine. So I think what happens is the science continues. We here are spinning our wheels, flying fundamentally the same types of airplanes that our grandparents flew in. But meanwhile, there's something else going on that would be truly revolutionary, that is truly revolutionary. And how far they go is a really good question to ask, and I don't have the answer to that. But I think that the answer is pretty advanced. And involves some kind of advanced secret space program. And the reason I believe there is a secret space program is really simple. All you have to do is look at the evidence of anomalies in Earth orbit that have been noted by US and Russian astronauts and start there. And it's actually an overwhelming case that there are anomalies galore in Earth's atmosphere and beyond. And if you were managing secrecy on this subject, you would need to investigate those anomalies. And so by definition, that would by itself be more than sufficient reason to have a secret space program. And of course, if you wanted to actually engage in one way or another out there, then all the more reason to do so. In addition, I think that there's a very significant underground infrastructure right below our feet, very likely. And I think it goes around the world. In addition to writing books on UFOs, I publish the books on UFOs by some very interesting researchers. One, Dr. Richard Dolan, I've known for years, and he's an expert on underground technologies, and he's written a number of books on it. I published one of his books, and after going through that word by word, I came away very, very with a clear idea that the technology and the money has existed to go deep underground for decades, generations. It's existed. And you get rumors and leaks, and it's hard to get confirmation. But we do know there's enough officially confirmed technologies and underground bases that capability to go anywhere, including under the ocean floors, believe it or not. That's not that difficult. So I think we're dealing with a very large infrastructure. It costs a lot of money, incidentally, and there's a lot of money that goes missing every year from the global financial community, and certainly from the United States defense establishment. There's a current news story making the rounds now about $21 trillion that have gone missing from the U.S. Pentagon and also secondarily the U.S. Housing and Urban Development, HUD. $20 trillion from the Pentagon, $1 trillion from HUD over the last basically 2 decades. An unbelievable amount of undocumented expenditures. The crazy thing is that the Pentagon's budget right now is $700 billion a year, which is as high as it's ever been. It's the highest military budget in human history. But $20 trillion over 20 years, that's even more. So how do they spend more money than their budget, and how is it undocumented? This is a question for really genius-level accountants to figure out. But my point is that there's a lot of money coming into this system. There's lots of points of where how money is being siphoned out of the public, and it's going into an infrastructure, at least in part, which I'm speaking here. So this is an expensive secret, and it affects more than Americans. It affects everybody. The lies, the control system to keep this in place is really profound, all right? So when you have such a massive discrepancy between truth and official truth, a discrepancy of this massive infrastructure that is off limits to us, that is siphoning out so much of our energy, our future, our money, and everything else, in my view, it becomes more and more important to control the population. And so the control exists financially, politically, culturally, spiritually. Financially, it seems to me that that personal freedoms are less and less considered useful for those people at the very top of our pyramid. Personal freedoms for us, I should say. They have always sought to live like gods, and now they want to live forever. They want to be immortal. They want to be post-human, transhuman, immortal beings, and they'll get it if they get their way, of course. But they, I think, increasingly have realized that when you create such a huge discrepancy, you need to keep it in place, and you have to keep it in place with control. And furthermore, I think it's just come to a point now where I think they've realized that 2 centuries, basically, of middle class are really no longer necessary anymore. For 200 years, the middle class was allowed to develop in Western civilization. It's kind of an anomaly. And they were allowed to engage in this pursuit we sometimes call free enterprise, to make money. So you can have all these people, just unleash them to figure out new products and new solutions. And those people at the very top actually benefited from that. So they were like, oh, well, let's let this go. This is good. This is good for us. And but it's actually, I don't think it's necessary anymore. We've got what's called the robo-apocalypse coming around the corner. We've got future AI. Intellectual labor increasingly is going to be done by algorithms and machines. Physical labor too, more and more. And actually, the work of people, I think, arguably, is going to be considered less important from the point of view of those people at the very top. And so what do you do with all of us? We become more and more expendable, and therefore it's more imperative to control us. And so the control is exerted financially, politically, culturally, and spiritually. There's an image of Lady Gaga there, and I don't want to single her out, but or the football games, the distractions that just take you away from what's actually important in this world, and also a culture that I firmly believe is intentionally being put into place to devolve us, not to evolve us, I think, to drag us down from our highest ideals, to just focusing on our basest needs. It's the easiest way to manipulate people, through hypersexualization of society and trivialization and the tossing in of fantasy culture. Every movie is like a fantasy now. It's like Marvel Comics. It's just that's all new movies. And why is that? You know, why have we created a culture that is based on fantasy? And I think the reason is because this is not an accident. It's to take us away from what's actually real and what's mattering. You know, next step, of course, is immersive virtual reality. And just, you know, your children, your grandchildren, that's their world. That's the world that's coming up. Now, one thing that always stays the same is that change is always here. So there's always, the more things change, the more they stay the same, isn't that it? Well, the world is always in a state of change. And so when I think about the UFO cover-up, I remind myself this cover-up has really officially been in place for, you know, about 70 years or so. It's not inevitable that it will last forever. And in fact, it's probably going to have to go through a permutation, a change. How will it? I have a couple of images here, some tech images. The world is speeding up. And what I mean to imply here is that not only are we developing new technologies to transform our interaction with the world, but we're changing our ability to relate information to each other. And that's really the key. You know, we're able to trade information with people around the world and share massive amounts of information. So it's an unstable situation, and my reasoning is that it's very likely that some kind of unexpected thing can happen. In the last 8 months, I guess it's 8 months now, the world has been a little different in terms of the UFO phenomenon, simply because of a key admission that started with the New York Times of all publications. I mean, the most deceptive, really in the history of 20th century American journalism is probably the New York Times. I mean, these are the guys who were deeply involved in what was called Operation Mockingbird. You know, that was the CIA's relationship with mainstream American media, by which they had hundreds of American journalists secretly on their payroll. If you don't know about Mockingbird, you should know about it. It's important because it's not just an American thing. I mean, that's the American version of it, I suppose. But Mockingbird supposedly ended in the 70s after it was outed. But it's actually the whole system of control or cooperation with mainstream media. It's deeper than ever. It's not just the CIA now. It's the U.S. Pentagon, which spends billions of dollars every year to manage its social image. That's a whole other lecture right there. But the New York Times has always been the establishment mouthpiece, and also the Washington Post, for sure. I mean, Bezos bought the Post for $300 million, which was half the money he got from the CIA to do its cloud computing contract. So they pay him $600 million. He uses half of it to buy the Post. It's a CIA publication, guys. That's all. And all you have to do is read the Post, and you can see it's clearly a CIA publication. So anyway, the Times and the Post lead this pro-UFO news cycle. What's that all about? And, you know, there's David Fravor and Luis Elizondo on CNN and on Fox doing pretty good interviews about the Pentagon's program from 2007 officially till at least 2012, and in fact it goes even further, to study UFOs and UFO technology. And this all came out. That was a really, really nice day for those of us who've been fighting this war for the last, you know, who knows how long, dealing with skeptics, dealing with ridicule. And then suddenly, in the middle of December, the Times says, no, actually, there's this program, and it's called Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Say what? And then, yes, it's all about UFOs, and they may have recovered UFO technology. This comes out in the New York Times piece. Crash retrievals. So it comes out. And then the question is, how much of a disclosure is it? Is this the beginning of the process? And that's what, you know, anyone who's been involved in this field the last 8 months, that's basically all we've been arguing about. Is this disclosure? Is it not disclosure? Is it a head fake psych out, or is it for real? And what are the motivations? Is this disinformation? You know, what is this actually that we're dealing with? And I guess, well, let me back up to it. So what do I think? I think that I think because disclosure on this is an inevitability, in the long term, it's an inevitability, that I think there is definitely a recognition among those people who've got the real information on this, the power, that will do a little drip, drip here and there. And you have to get the public acclimated to this. In my opinion, I don't think that this is any kind of, this certainly hasn't been followed up by any kind of concerted media effort. For example, the New York Times hasn't done any genuine follow-up on this story whatsoever. And no one's asking any of the right questions. Like, one question, if this is a genuine program, why have we ridiculed UFOs all this time? Like, not one single moment of self-examination by the establishment media. It would be kind of a nice thing if they were to do that. No one asking even one time, is this an implication that there's a genuine UFO cover-up? Like, that's a logical question. So in other words, the establishment media is just not going down the road that they need to go down. So, you know, they're very deeply controlled, and what comes out is what is, I think, permitted to come out. There are people, my colleagues and friends, I respect, have often argued that Hillary Clinton was going to be the disclosure president of the United States, and that John Podesta, her chief of staff, was, you know, promoting this, pushing this as well. And there is a good argument to be made for it, and I can't dismiss it. But I see, I cannot and I will not be able to ever understand how this is a genuine program of theirs. Because real disclosure is something that is going to go out of control very quickly. Like, unless they believe that we've gotten to the point, and maybe they do believe this, where they have total control over the global media empire, that they control all the narratives, and basically that is have a fascist society, because that's what that is. And unless they believe that they've achieved that now, I don't believe that there'll ever be a moment where they actually want to promote genuine disclosure of UFOs, because the secret is too profound, and it will easily threaten to go out of control. I wrote a book on this 8 years ago. I called it AD, After Disclosure. And I described disclosure as a paradox back then, and I stand by this. In other words, it's impossible. It's impossible to have disclosure. Why? Because those people with the secret will never have a genuine motivation to give this secret up, because, I mean, think about it. If a president, doesn't matter who's president, could be Trump, could be the next person, doesn't matter, whoever it is, if they say that this is real, people will ask, my God, how have you been able to keep this secret from us all these years? Like, it's a really genuine question to ask, and it's an inevitability. That's one little question, and it will get you into 70-plus years of criminal manipulation of our academic and media and everything else. And that's not a fun road to go down, because it involves intelligence community control and manipulation, and no one wants to be exposed to that. And that's just the political blowback. There's the economic realities, the transformation of going from a petroleum-based to a post-petroleum-based civilization. And I think that's an inevitability with genuine disclosure. I don't see how you can avoid it. And so much more. Unpredictabilities. So I think motivation makes it impossible. But I also have said the paradox is that it's inevitable. So it is impossible, but it's inevitable. It's inevitable because the secret keepers, as it were, are not the only part of the equation. There is us, and there's them, too, these other beings. They're part of this. And the world is speeding up. So there's a lot of room for unpredictabilities. And so that's why disclosure is a paradox. Now, there's different kinds of disclosure. And it's not just, what I'm not, I often will say this, and I'll say it again, I'm not a utopian. Not only am I not a utopian, I don't like utopians. Like, I don't trust utopians. Utopians actually cause a lot of suffering in this world and have done so since forever. Utopians are dangerous people, and when you run into them, you should, like as Steve said in the other lecture, back away. Or just don't engage, because, you know, I might have been a utopian when I was 10 years old. The world doesn't work the way that is. And so I guess what I'm saying here is disclosure is not going to solve every single problem. Disclosure will create almost as many problems as it solves. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have it. We need to have it. We need to resolve this discrepancy in this culture of lies. But to think that it's going to solve everything. One person out there says, well, with the free energy, we'll make the deserts bloom. You know, if I'm 10 years old, I could believe that. What free energy can also do is destroy your city really fast, really quickly. Like, free energy can do a lot of things. We have something that's almost akin to free energy. It's called petroleum. It is free energy compared with burning wood. It's actually really amazing. It's really efficient. When we started the petroleum revolution 150 plus years ago, people were like, this is amazing. We can transport this oil. It's easy. We can do everything. It was like free energy. It solved a lot of problems. It created more, just like free energy now would. All right, so it's like, let's get out of the mindset that, you know, all we need to do is solve this problem and we're going to fix everything else. That's not how the world is. All right, but anyway, so there's different kinds of disclosure. There's what I call control disclosure, or a fascist disclosure. That is a disclosure whereby you maintain control over the narrative at all times, pushing out alternative narratives. So you have to minimize the alternative community, call them fake news. That's happening now. By the way, there's laws being passed in different parts of the world that are banning fake news. They just had one in Malaysia a few months ago. So that's Malaysia, you think, who cares? But it's going to happen everywhere. The UK, which is losing its mind currently right now over the Russians, is working to ban and to limit fake news, and so is the EU. And it'll probably happen here too, and it's maybe even in the U.S., you never know. The U.S. is the one thing the U.S. has, as bad as it can get, is we still have the First Amendment, which is really ingrained in us. Even so, that could still, you know, banning fake news. I mean, that's the easiest way to, fake news now is what hate speech was 10 years ago. In other words, it's the leading edge of what authoritarian governments are using to limit freedom of speech in a society. So 10 years ago, if you engaged in what was called hate speech, they could use that to say, oh, you're not allowed to speak, because that's hateful. But what's better now is fake news. We need to protect the public from fake news. We have to keep you safe. So watch it. So, controlled disclosure is the idea of disclosing this reality of UFOs while maintaining total control over the narrative. And I think that's probably the leading candidate in the long run for what's going to happen. It's not my favorite one. Then there's accidental disclosure, and you can imagine a sighting happens or a leak happens, something unexpected. We do live in a world where unexpected things happen, and things come out, and who knows what next. And then there's citizen-driven disclosure. That's what this is really about, right? It's about people taking the lead in promoting a new paradigm. And I think that's the best for all kinds of reasons, because one of the things that's happened with this secret is that it takes power away from the people. And I think we believe in the people having at least some power, some control over our destiny and our lives. And maybe one of the best ways to do that is by driving this process to the maximum extent that we can. So once there's a disclosure, I can't believe I'm down to 2 minutes. I'm going to try to be done. I was really proud of the fact that I thought I had this for 45 minutes. So this is a painting, by the way, by a friend of Tracy's and mine, whose name is Emily Trim. Emily was one of the little girls in Zimbabwe for the UFO encounter that involved the 62 school children. If you've seen this on YouTube, it's incredibly powerful. And Emily, like a lot of those kids, they're grown up now, she has done painting after painting of these beings. She stood face to face with a being that looked just like that. We had her over at our house not long ago, and she's very wonderful. Anyway, what next after disclosure? Utopia? Well, I told you my answer there. We will always find a way to screw up something, I think. Will there be answers? Yes. We'll have some answers, and we'll have many more questions, undoubtedly. But we have a new relationship with these others. Will there be peace? Will there be war? Will there be revolution? Will there be freedom or fascism? Every one of these are on the table and can go either way. It's not a one-way ticket. It's not like, oh, we're going to have a peaceful world because we're going to hold the leaders accountable. No, it doesn't have to be that way at all. Disclosure isn't the end of anything. It is only the beginning of the whole next phase of the real fight for truth. Political blowback will happen big time. I talked about that. Truth inquiries. You can imagine this. citizens taking the initiative. You lied to us about UFOs. Well, what about 9/11? Or what about chemtrails or HARP? We're going to look into all of this, and it could happen. There could be this cascading effect, and it's really interesting to think, like, where could that end? I don't know where it would end, or I don't even know if it would begin, but it might. How would this affect world religions? My co-author and I wrote about this quite a bit in our book, and I think some would be probably more affected than others, but I think all would be affected in the long run, for sure, because where the world would be in a completely different paradigm, a completely different state of mind about what we are in our place in the cosmos, and it would inevitably affect our place in terms of world religion. How would it affect the world of academia and science? Well, there'd be a great revolution within those worlds, and I think ultimately a good one after the initial shock. Right now in the world of academia, you try talking about UFOs, they'll just run you right out on a rail. It's a very stifling culture. Not just UFOs, but anything vaguely associated with it. They just stop taking you seriously. They think you're a crazy person, and you lose all credibility. And it creates a culture of really suffocating culture that's unworthy of the finest minds, which are supposed to be those in academia. Transformation of culture, think about the 1960s, that cultural kind of revolution that happened in the West. Would there be something like that in a post-disclosure world? Well, I don't know if it would be like the 60s, probably not. But would there be a kind of new generation growing up into the world that would look very critically and very negatively upon those of us, the generation of the secrecy? Probably. It would probably transform their culture in ways that we just can't predict. You know, I have two young kids. Well, they're in their 20s now. And it just amazes me, you know, they go down a path that I could just never have predicted, and that's the way it is. Change really doesn't happen. We don't really change, right? It's the next generation that actually creates the change. They grow up in a different type of condition, different settings. And finance will be changed. I can't get into all of these. I'm just about done here. I'm running over. I'm apologizing, but we'll be done real soon. Culture wars. Look at these two images. You've got these ominous grays, and you've got this is the Galactic Federation of Light. If you don't know what they are, you should know about them. They're here to make the world a better place. At least that's what some people believe. In other words, what I'm saying here is a disclosure of this reality is probably not going to include any of these beings on a stage. Probably not. And because it doesn't, there's going to be arguments and arguments that will never be resolved as to what exactly are we dealing with. Are we dealing with good guys? Are we dealing with bad guys? Are we dealing with people who love us and want to bring us into the next density, dimension, whatever it is? Or do they want to hybridize us and use us as slaves and as a battery, like in the Matrix? Who knows? We're not going to get that answer right away. And that's the culture wars. And it's just going to be exacerbated on the already pre-existing culture wars that we're having in this society. Just about done. One thing I will just say here is that the UFO subject is not the only, and I'm going to be almost radical here and say not even necessarily the most radical existential dilemma that we are dealing with in our society right now. If I were to ask myself, what am I more afraid of, aliens or advanced AI, I might pick advanced AI. And that's a revolution that is going to totally transform our world this fast, next 20 years or less. And what I can easily see happening is that the UFO subject, which is very important, I mean, absolutely, it's critically important, is going to be converging with the issue of artificial intelligence, which is also very important, and the transformation of our society that is, and then ultimately transhumanism is going to be very, very critically important issue in how all of this plays out. And I'm still working through a lot of these concepts. So disclosure is not isolated from some of these other important issues, in particular the issue of transhumanism. This is my final major slide here. So the war being waged is one in which, if you can imagine how our society has been structured like forever, it's hierarchically. By that, you have resources. Nowadays, it's oil, natural gas, and anything else that can be pulled out of the ground, which are controlled in local conditions, local areas by individuals with guns, who are then controlled by financial elites, who then extract those resources, make all the money, they sell them to you and me, And so it's a very hierarchical system, right? So it's also possible to envision something different, though. Instead of hierarchical, you can envision something as horizontal in this way, in which if there is a paradigm to move into, let's say, a free energy type of a paradigm, this is where it can be really good, potentially, where you can have actual freedom. You won't need to depend on a hierarchical system to get your energy and your heat, or your air conditioning, or your transportation. And when you have independence, see, that's the scary thing for elites. You have independence, you can therefore live your life as you dream, at least much more likely. And I think this can happen. And disclosure of the UFO reality is actually a really key driver that can do it. If you look at the way our world is moving right now, there's very few indicators. There's actually no indicators that I can see that are going to take us away from the kind of lurch toward global totalitarianism, 24/7, 365, surveillance of every little aspect of your life and control over every single thing that you will do for the rest of all time. I see no indications that are going to move us away, except this subject, and maybe a couple of others, where when the secret is blown open to wake people up sufficiently from this slumber that we have all been in. Every time you absorb your corporate news or your corporate entertainment, coming from Washington, the Pentagon, CIA, or Hollywood or whatever, and you're just taking that all in, poisoning your mind and your soul with that disinformation, and then wake up to recognize that there's another way. And I think disclosure of this reality, as messy as it will be, is the one chance, really the best chance that we have to break that cycle of disinformation and lies. That's my website if you want to learn more about what I do. It's Richard Dolan Members, and thanks a lot for your time. Thank you. Thank you, Victor. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And congratulations to the sound people back there for lighting up my mic each time, because I don't know when it's up. Let's have a round of applause for them. My goodness. The sound and the film eventually will make it to the website. And Jordan has asked me to let you know that the actual video of this will be put up on the ANP website very soon. He doesn't have any immediate plans for it, but the editing will take place very soon. The other thing that he asked me to share with you is to share the hell out of this conference on Twitter. All right. He didn't use that word, but he used another one. So if you do have an account on Twitter or any other social media, please feel free to share the information. And one more thing before I go, the idea, where am I at here? Those lights, okay. Oh, pictures. Feel free to take as many pictures as you want of whoever you want. There's a big banner outside. You've obviously seen it, so if you want to get a picture with one of our speakers or friends or whatever, feel free to snap away. But he's asked me that no recordings, video or audio, be done for copyright reasons, okay? And we will see you back here in about, let's say, 8 minutes, okay? Is that okay with you? We're a little pressed for time for the break, so we'll see you very soon. Thank you.